right, welcome. This is our second episode of the Business of Rowing, the Matter Consulting Business of Rowing podcast. And I'm super excited to have today Padraic McGovern, who is the Director of Rowing at the Pocock Rowing Foundation. Padraic has had a long and distinguished career in our community, in the rowing community. And as per tradition, I'm going to let Padraic talk a little bit about his background and the topic for today. What we're talking about, which I think is super relevant for everybody, is finding, hiring, vetting coaching staff for your club, and we're going to talk about best practices, the things that Padraic has learned over his career. But also, I think we're going to talk about one important challenge these days, which is finding coaching staff, which is kind of been a problem lately, as I think everyone would agree. So, Padraic, welcome. And, just for anybody watching that may not know you, just kind of give a little bit of a background, how long you've been in the sport, where you've been, what you're doing now.
Great. Well, thanks. And thanks again for having me. These are very, very pressing issues, not just as a theme throughout my own personal career, but just in our interest in thinking about the sport moving forward. So I appreciate you taking on this topic. And again, this is an issue that a lot of clubs have in common. So I'm really glad that more of us are talking about this, and the more people that we have in this conversation, I feel like the better we can address it. So I picked up, I was at the Everett Rowing Association for quite a while.
Everett, right. Yes.
Yeah, I sort of picked up rowing as a high school kid. I was lucky enough to continue on in college at St. Mary's in the Bay Area, which had just a wonderful experience as a collegiate athlete. A very small team, but it was just sort of a good fit for me, and like that. I wanted to continue on in the sport, so I moved to Seattle, continued to train. Rowed at the Lake Washington Rowing Club with a group of semi-elite athletes for a number of years.
Right.
Sort of picked up coaching a little bit to sort of pick up coaching adult rowing classes and sessions, which led to a team. I sort of picked that up a little bit of a way to kind of make money and subsidize my training.
Isn't it funny how we dip our toe in the water and we think, coaching's fun, we're going to do this for a little bit, it's a little bit of extra money, and then 20 years later we're career, right?
That's exactly how it worked. I had an offer to start coaching up at the Everett Rowing Association. Again, this probably speaks more to the long-term need for coaches, but I think I was hired the same day that I interviewed.
Great.
The day before the season started. So I mean, we're not the first people that are sort of addressing this.
Right.
But the coaching, first of all, it's just a fantastic way for me to sort of detrain and sort of put perspective on, the time that I'd spent investing in, rowing at a high level. And so it was sort of a way, I didn't think about it in the time, but I was sort of passing that along. And again, it was just a tremendous amount of fun. And I think the biggest thing that I remember from my first couple of years of coaching was just how impactful it was on the kids, and just really how big of change, how important it was to them, and how big of changes they were able to make just in everything about their life. And
right. And I think that's a really important point that I want to, consistently make over these conversations, is that, you've had competitive success in your career. You did very, very well at Everett, but it comes back to the experience that the athletes are having and the growth that they're gaining from that. I mean, you can have the most competitively successful team, crew, but if they're miserable and they're not having a great experience and they're not growing from it, then there's no point, right?
Yeah. And every athlete can participate in that. I think that's really, really important. So, I sort of ran into maybe a few things that we'll talk about, but after my sort of first run in coaching, I had a mortgage and, needed to make some more money. So, I sort of stopped coaching for a while. I got into the construction industry, which, again, sort of matched some of my other skills. It was very rewarding. Realized that I missed it and got back into coaching after about a 2-year hiatus. Like those skills afforded me the flexibility, right? I'm self-employed. So it afforded me the flexibility to sort of, maintain these sort of odd hours, both on a daily schedule, but then also on an annual schedule when I would coach, when I would take time off, when I'd be making money in the trades, but then coach and kind of keep my life in balance that way. I thought that was a good. So after sort of got into administration, for years, I sort of, I said, I wouldn't do that type of a job. There's no way you could pay me enough money to do that type of job. But, when an opportunity came over to, essentially be the executive director of the Everett Rowing Association, I took it, and I felt like it was an ability to impact, do what I was doing, but just sort of impact a group of young people and even coaches on a wider scale. So, I served in that role at Everett for just about 4.5, 5 years, and now I've been at the Pocock Rowing Foundation for almost 4.5 years now. So it's I'm not doing any coaching. I've been to coaching for about 5 years, and I certainly miss it. But again, as we talk about, just impacting things on a different scale. So
right. So your role once you came to Pocock, so you're not doing any coaching at all. You're strictly administrative. Do you ever get out in the water?
I've been doing some rowing a little bit, which is great. I have a tiny little bit of energy left over from my own rowing.
Right, there you go.
So I coach the coaches, and I coach administrators, and I coach the people around me. Just share what I've learned through, and the same way that I was coaching athletes. I'm just coaching a different level right now.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point that you made with coaching the coaches. And when the role of rowing director or director of rowing comes up in an organizational perspective, it's one of the things that I always talk about with my clients is that program director, that individual has to have the coaching experience to be a mentor to the actual tactical coaches, to coach the coaches. That's a huge role, I think. Let's sort of get on the topic at hand, specifically talking about Pocock. It's a large facility, it's a large organization. How many people are working there full-time, part-time, coaches wise, and staff, administrators, et cetera?
Yeah, so at the Pocock Rowing Foundation, we have 14 full-time staff. 3 of those staff work remotely, and at any given point in time, we have somewhere between 30 and 40 hourly rowing coaches. Working in our organization, and keeping in mind, we're running programs right at the local level, running some regional programs, and then we're also running, which obviously is a national program and like that. So the full-time staff are predominantly responsible for the administrative aspects, and we do rely on hourly coaches for pretty much all of our direct service.
Right.
We're associated with 3 facilities. Obviously, the facility in Seattle. There's about 550 athletes that go through that facility every year between youth and adults.
Wow.
About 150 athletes using the Renton Rowing Center at the south end of Lake Washington, and then about 250 this year using the facility up in Kenmore, the north end of Lake Washington. So
right. So almost 1,000 athletes.
Yeah.
And that's post-COVID. I mean, pre-COVID, were your numbers higher?
They were lower, but that's just because the Kenmore opened in the middle of COVID, right? So
okay, all right. So still, that's incredible to manage that number of people and that amount of staff. So looking at the staff piece of it, okay, you've got between 30 and 40 part-time coaches. There's going to be some degree of seasonal turnover, when you're talking with that volume. I would say every program probably loses 1 or 2 coaches a year and then has to replace them. So your process of finding new coaches is got to be pretty refined at this point. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think probably the process starts with some of the resources that we've dedicated to this process, right? I mean, I want to say a couple of years ago, we sent 82 W-2s out. So we've invested in essentially an HR director who owns these processes. Patty Finney just takes a tremendous amount of care and effort throughout the lifespan of the employee. I think that's something that we've dedicated resources towards. So, for sure. Obviously, sort of once we recognize the need for coaches, right? I'd say that probably the easiest at this point, we've got things refined. So we're not rewriting a job description every time we need to hire an hourly coach. So what we've done is our program managers, so Helen Tillman and Rachel Wong, put together a matrix that defines 4 levels of professionalism in coaching. So it's just pretty simple: level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And essentially, right, that sort of, there's sort of the rows of the matrix, and the columns are the different core competencies that each of the coaches needs to be present in, right? So safety, ability to teach, the ability to communicate, leadership,
Wow. Okay.
technical skill, physiology, rigging, and then really like the other responsibilities, right? Like how much ownership do they have over some element of the program? Obviously, level 4 are sort of our head coach or lead coach type responsibilities and like that.
Right,
So,
right. Is that a system that you developed, or is that something that you like actually strategically sat down and said we need to put this together, or is it something that sort of evolved over time?
a little bit of both. And there's something that
Uh-huh.
we've done that at Everett, and then we essentially recreated it again. Helen and Rachel both have a tremendous amount of experience in long-term athlete development. They're both, I would say,
Right,
experts in those fields. So it was a very, very collaborative effort, and I think we were all on board with the concept. And then, obviously we all sort of fleshed out the details again. Helen and Rachel did the bulk of the work, assigning which essentially what one would expect in the realm of communication from a level 3 coach. So
right. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. I've it obviously, Pocock's a large organization. You're managing a large number of staff. To have that kind of system in place where not only are you training coaches, but you also have benchmarks by which to evaluate their performance and potentially promote them internally. If you're, let's say you've got someone senior that moves on, then you have a process to which you can determine that, somebody else is ready to move up, right? I mean, that's like, that's great.
And the coaches use it as a self-evaluation tool. If somebody comes in and, I think I should have a little bit of a bump in pay. And so it's very easy for us to say, okay, great. Like, where would you rate yourself on these elements? Where would you rate your technical skills or your rigging skills or your responsibility? And, we sort of obviously assign pay rates to each of these, pay ranges to each of these, each of these rows, these essentially job descriptions. So,
is there, is there a situation where, like, let's say you have somebody, you have a position turnover, you're not redoing the job description that's been established. You know what the position is, you know what you need. What's the difference between, okay, let's look internally first, or we need somebody from the outside to, is it just simply the seniority of the position? Do you immediately say look internally first, or do you start looking to the larger community?
Yeah, I would say that we've set a culture that, again, we have to be flexible. I would say that really, such a tight labor market, we're probably not quite at that level of leisure for us to be able to assign responsibilities that at that high of a level. It's a lot of it just depends on who's leaving, depends on who can do what, depends on which coaches are adaptable, and then obviously it just depends on really who walks in the door or who we're able to recruit to fill some of these roles. So it's possible that we might have someone might be in a role that, holy smokes, they might not quite fully be suited for, but that's just the necessity of where we are and like that. So
right. So if you have an internal candidate, is there an interview process with that, or do you just simply say we're going to promote you?
I think on an annual basis, Helen and Rachel review. They review the prior year. They review who's been assigned to which squads. I think that's a big part of it. One of the very big hallmarks of the long-term athlete development program that we're running is, we've got the athletes divided by age. And so again, was that a good fit? What other skills do we need? Did this person move on? Would this person maybe be a fit with a better squad? Does this person need to sort of improve some of these core competencies before they can move on? So it's a very, it's a very ongoing, it's a very alive process that I think it has Helen's continual stewardship over.
So if I'm reading this correctly, essentially what you're saying is that you've developed a system internally where, maybe you bring in, coach candidates at the ground level that maybe have no experience, and then you're kind of training them progressively up. And as you have turnover, maybe at the higher levels, you're able to, sort of just backfill those positions. which is brilliant, right? I mean, that's how it should be done, right? So you can already put people in that know the culture, know, the technical style of the club, the training, what the training parameters are. I mean, it's a great example. It's a great example, and I hope people that are listening or watching can kind of think about a way that they can implement that into their own club.
I would say, so the coaches are a big part of that process as well, right? Sort of what they're enjoying, right? It's sort of alive with them as well, right? What squad they feel they're a good fit with, or where they feel their skills are, and again, it's a very collaborative effort there. So open communication that helps avoid the potential pitfalls of a system like that. So it's
and the other thing I've noticed is that, because I check every day. It's part of my it's part of my purview. Is Pocock's not frequently posting on Row 2K for classified ads, and that's because you have that sort of internal promotion system, right? It's rare that I actually see Pocock saying, "Hey, we're looking for coaches," right? How often are you posting? Do you have sort of, a tried and true? Do you just post the job description? Or do people actually come to you? Is there every year a class of UW rowers that graduates and say, "Hey, I'll go coach at Pocock for a year or two"?
Yeah, I feel the Row 2K, we certainly do post regularly on Row 2K. I'd say that the majority of our candidates, we get them from either their application, right? They might be interested specifically in working with the foundation. They might be interested particularly maybe in working with the center, or I think in all reality, they're involved somewhere either directly or indirectly, tangentially to our network. And obviously with such a big organization, we have a pretty broad-reaching network. We bring in people from a number of different. We do have a very our staff each have their own wide, overlapping but unique networks, and so
right.
We're very active about it. We'll sort of peruse our LinkedIn networks. I mean, we're hurting for coaches as much as everybody is, and
right.
So we're proactive. We're very proactive about it. Yeah.
So, in those situations where you are interviewing people from outside the community, okay, let's talk a little bit about your vetting process, your interviewing process. Talk about that, are you like, what kind of references are you asking for? Are you favoring coaching experience versus competitive experience? I think one thing I'd be really, really interested to know is, because this comes up frequently, is does high-level competitive experience equate coaching experience for Pocock? So talk a little bit about your interviewing and vetting process for external candidates.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing to note, we do internal candidates do go through a similar interview process, right? If they're moving laterally or moving up through the organization, they go through the same process.
Okay, they do. All right. Okay.
For sure. So, I think our preferences, our hiring practices, number one, we are prioritizing hiring coaches of color. That's something that's very important to us. And I would say that beyond that, female coaches, obviously, sort of a dearth of strong female role models, I feel for youth athletes, and we struggle with that as well. But we're very open-minded when it comes to coaching candidates. I feel like the qualities we're looking for, really just start with individuals that have a growth mindset, people that are willing to learn, people that are willing to share their knowledge, people that have a strong sense of self, they're comfortable with themselves, leads to a certain sense of confidence, right? Whether they have coaching or elite rowing or some other special experience. And then I'd say the other prerequisite is it's got to be it must come through very clearly that they love working with kids and that they love the sport of rowing, or they love youth sports,
Right.
So I think as you sort of ask about the reference process and like that, obviously some of those, the rowing network is very small. So we're very active about calling people that we know, whether someone's listed as a reference or not, if we know that there's somewhere in that Venn diagram, we'll call people and make sure that we're getting a coach that's, you know, a high quality person, a high quality coach, and someone that we all feel is equipped to work with kids. Something that we're incorporating again, sort of, you know, as we're sort of expanding our Safesport policies and our Safesport, essentially our Safesport influence is we've added questions to our interview process that would help us identify coaches that might engage in abusive coaching practices. And then we're also adding those type of questions to our reference checks. The idea of, you know, obviously, you know, everything from sexual predators to, you know, people that just engage in abusive coaching practices in some fashion.
Right. So can you, just out of curiosity, is it a question, like, what does a question like that look like? Like, can you give me an example? I'm curious.
On a reference check, you know, you might ask a reference, do you see any reason this candidate should not be working with kids? Ask a coaching candidate, how do you deal with a situation that might frustrate you? And those type of questions that kind of get the candidate talking about how they might respond in a situation where there's an opportunity for a coach to, you know, behave abusively, you know, sort of like that.
Right. And I think it's so important, you know, for any candidate, any level, to have those case questions, right? Like, here's a situation. Okay, what would you do? Right. You know, and not just working with the athletes, but, you know, as we all know, as coaches, sometimes the parents can be a challenge too, right? How would you deal with a challenge from a parent about a lineup situation or, you know, or something like that, right? I think those are all, and then, yeah, you're right. Like, sometimes there's a tell in there. The candidate is obviously in the interview is in their best behavior, but sometimes they say something or they let something slip that's a red flag, and then you can sort of ask further questions about it to see if there's some sort of, you know, further evidence that maybe this isn't somebody that should be working with young athletes, right? Or even adults, right? Sometimes it's a factor with adult rowing, masters rowing as well. Can you
Actually, I would say, you know, as part of that process as well is, you know, something that it took me a while as an administrator to really understand the value and the power of this. And again, I know sometimes it's very impractical to form an interview committee, again, for something as simple as, you know, an assistant coaching position. But that is something that I found that is incredibly valuable over the past 4 or 5 years, is convening an interview committee of, again, right, hiring a coach for your youth team, bring in a couple of youth athletes, bring in a parent, bring in a management committee or a board member, so that the administrator is not making a hiring decision in a vacuum, and something that an administrator might miss, you know, youth athlete would certainly pick up on. And, you know, whether that's discomfort or confidence, or, you know, essentially the basic question, would you row for this person? Because, you know, do you see yourself working with this person? And I think it's helped us make sure that we have the right candidates in the right spots. But I think it also gives the candidate a really good chance at, right, you've got investors in that candidate. And so, you know, the first day of practice, you know, sort of the athlete or the parent, the board member, they've sort of spread the word around that they're excited about the candidate. So it's a very good way to kind of ensure that the candidate has a really good landing spot in the organization. And I've been just and again, it takes a bit of effort, but I feel like it's very worthwhile to engage that a larger in that process. Yeah.
That's really, really insightful. And I always recommend, to your point, the committee. You know, sometimes people will kind of roll their eyes. Okay, we're going to get a committee for an assistant coach, you know, for the second assistant novice coach. And it's like, well, yeah, because even if it's 3 people evaluating that candidate, you know, I always say, like, when everybody in the room agrees, I get nervous. So, you know, you always want a dissenting perspective, because they're seeing it from a way that you don't see it, or they're seeing something that you don't see. And even if you can say, like, even if the group sort of like agrees, like, okay, the dissenting opinion is not the majority, and we largely feel like this is not going to be an issue. That's okay, right? But I do think that you want to look at everybody from all angles. You want all perspectives, as many perspectives as possible, actually. And it may even take a little bit more time, but if the difference is between time, extra time taken, and then somebody getting hurt later down the line, then it's worth it, right? It's absolutely worth it.
I would say it also sets the tone that the coach is accountable, not just to the administrator, but the coach is accountable to a peer, the coach is accountable to the athletes, the coach is accountable to some other oversight group and like that. So it's
right.
It says a lot. It says a lot.
So can you talk just very briefly, any anecdotes there, like a situation, a hire that wasn't the best decision and what you learned from that, and then obviously a hire that worked out really, really well, and how that worked?
I would say the poorest, probably two common elements in poor hiring experiences are either lack of clarity on the part of the organization as to what we were looking for, or lack of clarity on the part of the candidate as to what they were looking for. So I felt like that tends to make a challenging hiring experience. And then, one thing I feel like we've learned also is again, it's sort of a no-brainer HR item here, but the salaries need to be commensurate with what skills related experience or what special skills you're looking to bring in. And that is just a huge factor in the long-term success of the employee, is that the salary has to be commensurate, because it's nonprofit, it's rowing, and like that, we certainly understand all that. But, there's a base level of compensation that's
absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I've been advocating for fair salaries for years now. And I think it's something that, I saw something on a message board the other day that was kind of agitating, where somebody said, rowing coaching is a hobby at best, right? And I thought, like, okay, here's somebody that doesn't get it. Right. The fair pay improves the professionalism and the experience that the athletes are having, right? Like, take the competitive agenda. It's not even really about winning or losing. It's when the athletes, whether it's youth masters, whatever, the coach is providing an environment and an experience. And if you want that athlete to have a good experience, that coach has to be compensated fairly for, to be a professional. Right. And that's so important. Moving on to the compensation piece of it, which I think falls a little bit into retention, and I think that'll also lead into the final part of our conversation about the coaching market today. Are there things within the organization that you actively do in order to help retain coaches, to make them want to continue to work at Pocock?
Yeah, say, sort of separate. There's some things that are in our control when it comes to retention, and we feel like those items, our strategies include training. We train the coaches, right, so that they are equipped to. We just spent a week of training with our youth coaches. We spent a week with safety training, Safesport training, trauma-informed coaching training that equips them to have a better experience as a coach, right? So I think that's key. To get sort of investing in them.
I'm sorry. What do you mean by trauma-informed coaching training? I've never heard of that. What is that?
Yeah, for sure. So the understanding, this training encompassed a certain element of education about how the brain develops and how the brain develops in the face of adverse childhood experiences.
Oh, okay.
We think about, all of us have some type of trauma in our lives like that. And so understanding, right, the basis of this training is understanding, right, you see an athlete in front of you who may be reacting in a certain way to a stressful situation, and this training equips the coaches to understand, number one, sort of the physiological nature of that reaction, how that's developed, like what's actually going on, why the athlete might be dysregulated, why the athlete might have reacted in a certain way. And so it's a phenomenal training that we worked with the Center for Healing and Justice in Sport to, again, that sort of their module. It's, they've sort of, this concept that they've been willing to sort of work with us and share with us for us to train the trainer, right? They trained us in these practices, and then we're training our coaches in these practices, looking to roll out to some other clubs and like that. So it's,
wow, that's amazing. That's great.
Again, so I think
great. I think, as coaches, I think that's, sometimes, particularly when you're working with young athletes, their behavior seems aberrant, but there's a reason behind it, right? And, as a coach, sometimes you may get frustrated, like, why is this kid doing this right now, right? And then the more awareness you have that, like, okay, this isn't just out of the blue. There's actually, there's a reason that this is happening, and being prepped for possible contingencies around that, I think, is extremely useful. That's a great idea. Was that your idea? Whose idea was that?
No, that was sort of our organization is, it's Carla Landis, John Campagna, Jen Gibbons. I mean, this is a very, Kayla Cloud. There's a lot of voices have been in this. Right.
Yeah. So again, training, retention,
training. Open source knowledge. I mean, we celebrate the coaches. The coaches, they get along. I mean, I feel like they have a strong culture themselves. And open source sharing of knowledge. We share, we give them feedback. I feel like, whether they're doing something, that they need to adjust, something that they're doing great, we interact with them, we spend time with them. And again, this is sort of our lead coaches and our program directors, Helen Tillman, Mitch Long. They are, Phoebe Marks Nichols with the adult program. I mean, they spend a lot of time with the coaches, and again, sort of making the coaches, making them better at their jobs, and they have more satisfaction, then they feel like they're making a bigger impact. So giving the coaches the tools to do what they want to get out of coaching, and be able to share some of the things that they feel like they'd like to share, and the environments that they'd like to put on, and put the athletes in the positions to grow and develop and succeed, and be good people. So it's
have you do you have experience with, has there been an incident or a time where you've noticed, like, I've been reading a lot about this quiet quitting phenomenon, right? I don't know if you've heard of this. Have you had any, experiences you could share about where you noticed maybe a coach isn't happy or is on the verge of leaving, and you value that coach's presence in the community, and, steps that you've possibly taken to kind of, intermediate with that?
Yeah, I would say that we can sort of, thinking about sort of our job description matrix and like that, I would say that we do a really nice job of mitigating that by giving the staff ownership, right? And celebrating their ownership, right? So making it really, really clear, sort of push responsibility, as much responsibility. You're going to be responsible for this section of practice. And then, it's a sort of ownership and engagement. That is just a huge tool to avoid that. And so again, right, a lot of collaboration. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Oh, that didn't work out. So again, just kind of that sharing of ideas absolutely helps with engagement. And then again, something as small as like, hey, last week, you ran the land trainings. Next week, you're going to run water trainings. You're running a group of eight athletes you're responsible for. Maybe you're responsible for loading the trailer. Maybe you're responsible for this. Again, just giving as much clear responsibility and parameters to the coaches. I feel like that really, really helps mitigate that, and celebrating it. Being grateful.
Do you have coaches rotate around? So like some programs will have, 1 year the varsity, or let's say the U19 boys coach, men's coach, and then next year that coach moves over to the U19 women. Do you rotate coaches around that way?
Not quite as formally, but we do. Put it this way, I feel like during COVID we did too much of that, and the athletes didn't quite like it, and the coaches didn't quite like it, so we've sort of reduced some of that. But we are, like you're saying, I think aspirationally we would do more of that on a seasonal basis, or maybe a monthly basis, rather than like a daily or a weekly basis. Felt like
really
COVID, we were just, obviously during COVID, everybody was doing everything they could to kids in the water and like that, but too much switching, too much flexibility. People they weren't able to. Everybody just wasn't. Coach athlete groove wasn't able to really develop. But aspirationally, we are on board with that philosophy that spread spread the voices out among a greater group of athletes and like that. That's absolutely.
So this is somewhat tangential to the conversation, but in that case, if you have staff moving around, obviously during COVID, like a daily, that was during COVID, but even monthly or seasonally, the training plan, is that a shared thing across all the squads, or are the coaches developing their own? So how would that work? Let's say if you've got a coach that's been working with a squad for, say fall season, and then you change it. Is there sort of a common training plan that everybody's using?
There is. Yeah, that's one of the hallmarks of the way Helen Tillman has, our program manager, head coach of the
Really?
That's the way she's designed essentially the entire 5 to 6 year experience for the athletes. So
really,
Helen has a sense that, right, everything, again, right, sort of not just the training plan, but also the language you use and the type of, again, it's our goal to get as much standardization in this athlete experience, right? So
wow.
the athletes aren't switching gears from their novice year to their next year. They're not switching to a radically different type of training or radically different type of talking about selection or a radically different language around how the blades are, need to get in the water, like that. So it's
Wow.
been about
That's
a 2-3 year
fascinating.
investment. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it is.
We could have a whole other call just about that.
Yeah, we could. You should bring Helen on. Helen would be a fantastic resource. Helen is way more advanced than I am on the details of that. So yeah, she'd be a great asset. Yeah.
All right, mental note. We'll get that on the schedule. Okay, so to sort of wrap up I think the process that you've developed there is sounds kind of amazing, right? And I'm hoping that people that view this can sort of pull some pieces out of it and sort of implement that into, because I think you guys are doing a great job there. It seems like it's working really, really well. The what I want to talk about now, though, is, and I think we're talking about this a little bit earlier, is the basic question: why is it so hard to find coaches right now? You mentioned it, that Pocock is challenged. If you were following the open positions, the classifieds on Road 2K, at one point there was almost, I think, 106, maybe even 170 open positions posted on Road 2K, which is the most I've ever seen. What just your personal opinion, why do you think that is? Why are we in this situation?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of factors. I feel like one factor is, there's so much expected from our coaches, right? And that takes time to develop. That's it. We just don't have the time to both see through the training and then see through the growth and development period. There's so many other attractive opportunities for coaches, right? They're high performing, they're high, they have goals and they're ambitious, right, and that. Right. The same thing with the time commitment. I feel that the time commitment that's required, not just, to engage in the training sessions and go to practice, but then also be prepared for practice, and analyze practice. All of a sudden you're asking for, 10, 15, 20 hours a week of someone's time. Again, that's a challenge if someone is working 40 to 50 hours a week in another position, right, but then it's also a challenge if that's their only source of income, or if they're trying to post together 2 or 3 different, part-time positions. So that's set up for super sustainability on the personal level.
Because I think a lot of people, will sort of go and blame COVID, rowing clubs shut down, as did everybody else, for 18 months to 2 years. A lot of coaches, sort of fell out and they found other opportunities. But, I think that the hemorrhaging of, I don't know if that's the right word, but the hemorrhaging of coaches started even before that.
Yeah.
Because I remember even in 2019, even in 2018, it was getting hard to find coaches. And so I think this has maybe been a process that's been ongoing for the last 3 or even 4 years, where, my personal opinion is that there's better paying opportunities out there. And when you look at a coaching opportunity and the hours associated with that versus the compensation, one of the things generationally speaking, what I've learned about Gen Z is they're very, very practical. They're very, very pragmatic individuals. And, you know, the birth of the side gig is they will not engage in that side gig unless they are 100% confident about that they're going to get compensated fairly for that. And I think that's maybe one of the challenges that a lot of rowing clubs don't recognize is like, okay, yeah, we'll pay you $15 an hour and you're going to have fun. Right. And obviously, you know, you're not doing that at Pocock. You're paying fairly. And a lot of other clubs are paying fairly, but you know, I did a survey a couple weeks back about, you know, does your club pay coaches fairly?
Mm.
And one of the options was no, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Right. And you think that's kind of a blunt, you know, a blunt perspective, but I was kind of surprised at the number of people that voted that said just, yeah, no, we don't pay fairly, but that's just kind of rowing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest fears on sort of with the sport, I feel is that the potential that athletes are getting done with the sport when they're, you know, when they leave college, and they can't wait to stop rowing. That's a bit of a fear. And then I think it's also a bit of a fear that, you know, potentially coaches, right? Coaches are not setting good role models as coaches, and right, they don't make the position attractive, right? You know, the coaches are exhibiting signs of burnout. Coaches are exhibiting signs of, you know, unhappiness with the sport. You know, obviously collegiate coaches, all coaches are under a tremendous amount of pressure. And, you know, I fear that, yeah, that's a sort of a hidden fear, again, sort of just, you know, sort of anecdotally or observationally, but, you know, they're not making they don't make the profession look attractive. You know, it doesn't look like something like, well, these coaches this is a struggle. This is hard. This is not fun. This is not that. Anyway, it's
yeah, I think that's an amazing point. That's right. Like, who wants to be a coach? I mean, one of the things that my wife has said, and you know, and she's not a rower, she's not affiliated, you know, and part of the language, but she says being a coach is such a great job. You're outside, you know, you've got really, really specific parameters for performance. You know if you're doing a good job, you know if you're doing a bad job. Why are all rowing coaches such miserable bastards all the time? Right. And I think it's true. I think there's a lot of coaches out there that just sort of project this attitude of being unhappy. And why? Like, one of the things that I always loved about rowing was like, because we're having a great time. Like, I loved every minute of rowing and every minute of, well, maybe not every minute of coaching, right? There's always frustrations there, but like, I think we need to change culturally the perception of, you know, that it's okay to train and row and have a good time, right? And enjoy what you're doing and be happy to be there. I don't think there's enough of that. I don't think there's enough of like coaches actually willing to say, look at their athletes and say, I am so excited to be here. I am so excited for this training session. It's something I would say to my coaches, or I would say to my athletes every day, we're gonna have so much fun today, right? Even if the workout's 5 by 5 minutes, competitive, king of the hill, right? We're still gonna have fun. You know, it's gonna be an amazing time. And it frustrates me when I see coaches that are like, I hate my job and I hate being here, right? And it's like, you got to think about it. You're projecting that onto the athletes, right? You know, it's incredible.
I feel that's sort of our final question here. Yeah, I think that's again, I just couldn't agree more. I feel like throughout my coaching and administrative career, right, the more fun that it was clear that I was having, you know, I had that telegraph through to the athletes, and the more fun we all had, and you know, unsurprisingly, those crews had excellent results, had excellent satisfaction, you know, just an excellent experience. And I would say that unsurprisingly, a lot of those athletes wound up getting into coaching or administration or whatever, and you know, just at some point, right? Even for some point in time, and again, I think that's a true legacy that as coaches we can leave the next generation, is to promote the profession and to be excellent role models as
Right.
as the sport as being a positive influence, and yeah, maybe less about, you know, less about our 2Ks and maybe more about, hey, is this something that is a positive influence that I want to take with me for the rest of my life? And
Right.
it's a true
Right.
legacy. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So two final questions. The first
Yeah.
one is, do you have any specific points for an organization that's struggling to fill headcount right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any specific points of advice that you would say, like I call you up and I say, God, I'm having such a hard time finding coaches. Any sort of broad advice that you would offer?
The first thing, I would start with your current athletes, and I would promote the profession with your current athletes, and stand up there in front of your athletes and say, yep, our next are of coaches is in our boats today. So I feel like that is a very concrete item that we can do today to start planting the seed for people to think about and imagine themselves in a position of being a rowing coach. We talked a lot about the training. You know, I feel that the more training we can give these coaches, right, the more confident people will enter the profession. So I feel, you know, coming in with a strong training plan for the coaches is just an incredibly helpful item. Say, be creative with your schedules. You know, I feel like so often rowing coaches feel the need to be at every single practice, and I think that's sort of a silly, you know, I mean, sort of a silly model to set, right? I mean, we don't see coaches taking erg tests or, you know, running 10Ks with the kids. I mean, why would all of a sudden the coaches feel that they need to be there every day as to set the good example? If they're not there, nobody's going to do it. Well, don't do anything else that the athletes do, but except for show up. So again, I feel like we're missing a lot of talent because people don't have the time. If you can get a really special person in there for 2 days a week, great. They're your Saturday coach. They're your technical coach. They're your erg coach. They're your land coach. They show up and they coach starts, or there's some way that we can involve these people. So just being creative with our scheduling and sort of, releasing ourselves from some of these historical burdens of expectations, I think is, again, it's a challenge, but I feel like there's a lot of room to be gained there, and potential. People say, I just don't have the time. I got a family. I got a kid. Hey, I understand that. Come down on Saturdays, or can we get you on Tuesday and Thursday? So I feel like that's again, just be creative with be creative, think outside the box there. So
that's an excellent point. That's really, really important. I think there's a perception that, if you're going to hire a coach, that you're going to put all this expectation on them about what their contribution is going to be.
Right.
And that can drive people away. Right. So, measure your expectations, right? Sometimes it's better to have a very, very highly qualified, capable candidate 2 days a week than not at all. Right. Or even 1 day a week, right? Than not at all. Like if you turn these people away because you set the expectations too high, then you don't get anything.
Right. Other sports have figured that out, and I think rowing by necessity will figure it out, and it's also, goes into the idea of having a very, diverse set of perspectives, that it's all influence. It's all just a tremendous positive influence on you to hear from somebody who's an attorney during the day, or hear from somebody who's a carpenter, or hear from somebody who puts landing gear on airplanes all day long.
Yeah.
Like, that's very valuable.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So last question then is, and this is something I do on my socials, is I have a pro tip Tuesday, which is just a hack, just a little coaching hack that you can share, that you learned, that like it's just going to save 5 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe even a whole day. What do you think? Pro tip from Padraic.
I would just say that the pro tip is to put the same effort into engagement and fun that you put into your training zones and your video review and your technical aspect.
Amazing.
You'll gain more speed from that than you will from, if somebody spent an extra 30 seconds in AT2 or level 3, level 4, whatever. So, and that's really what the athletes will take away from it. And
wow. Okay. So what you're saying is, take the time that you're putting into the science of your training and understanding rowing technique and the execution of a training session, let's say, put the same amount of time in figuring out how to make it enjoyable for the athlete.
And engagement. Absolutely. Engaging, direct engagement with the athletes. Absolutely. Right. Exactly.
Right. Wow. That's a great tip. Okay. Well, we're out of time. Went over a little bit, but that's okay. Patrick, I really appreciate you participating in this. I think this is a great conversation. My hope is that somebody, learns something from this and has a takeaway. I wish you best of luck. You guys are probably in practice and training now, right? You guys are full steam now, huh?
Yep, full steam. There's hundreds of kids taking to the water these days, which is great to see. And they're learning. It's awesome. So thanks again for having me. As you can tell, I'm obviously fired up about this topic, and appreciate talking with you about it, and sharing your experiences as well. And we'll see you around.
All right.